Now I know when I did the Jurassic World video I said it was just going to be a one-off, but tonight I watched Terminator Genisys, presumably only for reasons stemming from the fact that my father never loved me as a child, and as a result the psychologically damaged individual I became thought this would be a good idea. Also my mate has a spare ticket, and being a lonely nerd on the internet I can't help but review it. There's a lot I have to say about Terminator Genisys, almost none of it good, but a lot nevertheless. Genisys unfortunately exists as nothing more than a weird concoction of average, finding foundations to ground itself only from the franchise whose shoulders it stands on. To help you truly appreciate what schlock this movie equates to, I will be ranting about major plot points, so to anyone who's interested in seeing this movie, be warned, spoilers abound. That said, it doesn't really matter since whoever marketed the film gave away all of the major plot points in the trailers, including something that's supposed to be a massive twist. So if you've been to a cinema recently and you sat watching the adverts before your movie of choice starts, then chances are you've already had it ruined for you. Round of applause for the marketing team on that one. Well done, guys. So the film is a pseudo-continuation of the Terminator saga, retelling the story of Kyle Reese going back in time to stop the murder of Sarah Connor at the hands of a robot from the future bent on mankind's destruction, albeit with a twist in the formula. Rather than travelling to the story we know and love, this Kyle Reese creates a new timeline. For reasons. Instead of travelling to a good movie, Kyle now finds himself in a past with a Sarah Connor who knows all about what happens in the future and has been being protected by a T-800, gleefully played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, since she was 9. Everything is different now, the movie proclaims proudly, wearing the statement like a badge of honour as if it just completed the summer school programme at its local Boy Scouts and its mum is clapping at the side. The problem is though, everything isn't different, is it? Like Jurassic World, another recently released film that attempts to breathe new life into a long dormant franchise, Terminator Genisys doesn't seem to be able to cope with its own story without offering a barrage of homages and motifs from older, better films. It's as if Genisys were a nostalgic old man long past his prime looking back on a scrapbook of his youth, as the film makes every attempt to appease long-time fans of the franchise by butchering up the iconic scenes and replacing them with CG-heavy reshoots. All the imagery is represented with little exception, from the T-1000 sprint to the Terminator walking out of fire to the I'll be back line. You can tell the movie is trying really hard, to the point where it's practically screaming, "We're doing that thing you like, guys, come on, love us." But it all comes across as less of a homage and more like when a child tries on his dad's business suit. Adorable, yes, but it ain't getting business done. Add to this the fact that while the movie constantly rips off the previous Terminator iconography, it doesn't seem to really understand its own legacy. And by legacy I do of course mean Terminator 1 and 2, not 3 and Salvation, because fuck those movies. Though it understands to put in the pictures that made the other films famous, it doesn't seem to get the context that was present in the original films that made those images so memorable. In fact, I'd go so far as to say the film doesn't get Terminator at all, and you'll see why when I talk a bit more about the plot. So the film starts in the future, as it always does with Terminator movies, and things aren't going all that groovy. Humans are at war with a terrifying scourge of robots. Some of them even have the powers to disguise themselves as people, which the human resistance called Terminators. The resistance to the robot menace is led by John Connor, played by Jason Clarke, the only actor whose name I'll be mentioning from henceforth, as he's the only one who seems to be doing anything resembling acting. Also playing a significant role in Dumbledore's army is our protagonist Kyle Reese, who is the best friend of John Connor. In a very generic scene that, if it were not for the littered around Terminator iconography, could have came from any sci-fi war movie ever, the two, along with the rest of the resistance, storm the HQ of Skynet, the intelligence program at the centre of the evil robot uprising, and effectively shut it down, but not before Skynet manages to send a Terminator back in time to murder John Connor's mother so that he is never born and the resistance doesn't happen. It's all very familiar. Kyle Reese, being John Connor's best friend and knowing all about Sarah Connor through stories, decides to go back in time after it in order to protect Sarah. As he does so, one of the soldiers, played by Matt Smith, reveals himself to be a Terminator and grabs John Connor to do some weird shit to him that we don't see. This marks the first but not the last time in the movie where thinking about the plot at more than face value makes the entire thing crumble. Why didn't Matt Smith just murder everyone there and then if he was a Terminator all along? The resistance in the room literally have their back to him for a long period of time, and he has a machine gun. Why wait till Kyle is in the time machine and travelling back, giving the resistance a chance of hope? These questions are of course never answered, but the movie instead attempts to distract us with different nonsense. Before Kyle manages to see what happens to his best bud, he is thrown through time and sees a series of cryptic flashbacks from a childhood life he's never led, which gives him clues as to how to stop the rise of Skynet. This is because he's went into an alternate timeline, and although you don't know it at this point in the movie, what is happening is that Kyle is remembering the child he was in this timeline. The explanation? He hit a nexus point that causes some sort of rift in his psychology, so he remembers the life that hasn't happened yet of a childhood where the apocalyptic Judgment Day mentioned in Terminator 2 doesn't happen in 1997 but instead in 2017. You understand that? Of course you don't, because it's senseless and inane bullshit, and the movie delivers this information in such ham-fisted technobabble spouting exposition, it's embarrassing even by sci-fi standards. This is the kind of writing that early Star Trek episodes would have rejected for being too nonsensical.
It is a mass of plasma energy, contained within discrete boundaries by an outer covering of silicates, actinides, and carbonaceous chondrites.
We then see a parade of homages that feel like soulless box ticking. Iconography bingo, if you will, as the original Terminator, made to look like a young Arnie, tries to get some rather biker-looking fellow's clothes. Kyle Reese runs from a T-1000 in all its liquid metal trickery and evades police while running naked in the mall from the original movie, stopping only to get dressed with various stolen items. It even replicates the product placement of the first film, as he picks up the wonderful Nike Vandal trainers he wears in that movie. It's at this point in the film they truly lost me. While nothing so far had been spectacular, it was functional and inoffensive, but I want to take a step back for a moment and talk about the first film. Now I know some people consider it unfair to judge sequels based on the content of their previous entries in the franchise, but you have to understand that Genisys is forcing me to do this. By constantly reminding us that as a continuation of the narrative of the 80s classic, it's opening itself to a firing squad. If it claims so much to be part of the same story as those movies, then I'll judge it by the highest standards of that story thus far. After all, if a television series suddenly dipped in quality halfway through production, you wouldn't use the excuse, oh, but this is a different episode, those other episodes don't count even though this one continues their narrative, would you? Now, Terminator holds a special place in my heart. It's a phenomenal movie that overcame a limited budget in imaginative ways and told a chilling horror story. And that's right, I said horror story, because Terminator is as much a horror film as it is a sci-fi. Yeah, you aren't jumping out of your seat as things fly at the screen and the audio spikes, but you look at the character of the Terminator and tell me it isn't the perfect slasher villain. The Terminator was the unthinkable evil, a killer constantly in pursuit of our terrified protagonist Sarah Connor. You can't kill it, it can't be reasoned with, it won't stop till you're dead. From the moment Arnie arrives on the scene in the first movie, there isn't room for Sarah Connor or Kyle Reese to breathe. They're constantly in hiding, constantly on the run, and there's seemingly no end to their terror in sight that wouldn't result in both of their demises. In fact, this character is made so frightening that towards the end of the movie there's an interesting scene where Kyle gives his life in an explosion in an attempt to kill the Terminator. Of course, the Terminator is still alive even after this, and what's worth noting is that when we see Sarah Connor flee the body of the one she loves when the Terminator turns out to be not all that dead, it doesn't feel out of place for our hero to do that. In any other movie, leaving someone loved or loyal to you when danger strikes would be seen as a villain move, but not here. The sight of that crawling Terminator carcass reaching for her as it pulls itself over Cal's lifeless corpse has only one correct response. Pick up your reasonably priced Nike Vandal trainers and run. Run the fuck away, because this thing is believably that terrifying. As a sci-fi action film, the Terminator shared more in common with Mike Myers and Jason's than did Jedi's and John McClane's. T2 was far heavier on action, but still at all times the Terminator in this movie was an unrelenting and legitimate threat. Now take that thought and let's go back to Genisys. When we get to the scene where the Terminator is harassing some punks for their clothes, another good Terminator confronts him and they fight. The bad Terminator is then immediately killed in about 30 seconds with a gunshot to the chest from Sarah Connor. Fuck that. It's not even like there's a major struggle. You could argue the heroes have a good robot on their side this time, but he isn't the deciding factor in the bad robot's death. To make matters worse, the T-1000 is also easily disposed of at the quarter-end point of the movie. Another pointless villain only there for nostalgia's sake who creates another non-threat. It might seem like overkill to dissect the creative decision to make these robots such minor threats when they aren't the main villain of the movie, but it represents not just a fundamental misunderstanding of what Terminator was, but also filmmaking in general. Even if you ignore the fact that the heroes make quick work of villains who in this narrative previously have been established as nigh on unstoppable monstrosities, the film still fails because the whole way through the film not once do our heroes feel vulnerable. In the heat of intense action scenes or while on the run, they'll make quips or they'll find time to put the Ramones on, and even when they're taking things seriously, there is never a point where I feel like they could lose. Now I know, yes, they're the good guys, they're almost definitely winning, but a good movie should make me doubt that, even if just for a moment. I want to see characters pushed to a point of no return and then overcome all odds, not just overcome all odds without any real difficulty. I mean, for Christ's sake, even the main villain, who by the way is John Connor in a surprise reveal that comes halfway through the movie that was shown in the sodding main trailer, can be stopped in his tracks by a magnet. When the protagonists seem to have such an easy time with everything, why should I bother watching? There's no stakes. You can tell us the world is on the line as much as you want, but what does it matter if we don't ever doubt that it's in completely safe hands? Although, to be fair, Cal does have Nike Vandals, so it's perhaps reasonable that he would just do it. Just do it! Excellently crafted and reasonably priced footwear aside though, there isn't even really a point in me tearing into the rest of the plot hole riddled and oddly paced narrative because Even if it was an extremely well written epic, the lack of uphill struggle depicted in the directing takes away all of the drama anyway. That's not to say I won't though, because I will. So as I mentioned before, the main villain of this movie turns out to be John Connor, who is morphed into a part human, part robot, presumably since he was attacked by Doctor Who as punishment for the writers fucking about with the time travel, despite clearly not having a good idea of how to use it. Now here's the thing. If John Connor is immediately made evil after Kyle Reese travels back in time, then who reprograms and sends back the good Terminator who's been protecting Sarah Connor for all these years? The movie never attempts to explain it. It goes so far as to acknowledge the inconsistency when the Terminator says the data on who sent him back has been deleted, but never does it reveal a logical solution as to who it ever would have been and why they would have done that. It presents a mystery without answers.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Which I'm not sure if that's even lazier writing than accidentally leaving a plot hole in, because clearly the people making this movie have noticed something's wrong with the logic of the script, but like an untidy house host, they've just swept the mess under the rug in front of our very eyes and somehow hope we wouldn't notice. Other plot holes are often explained away in the very same manner, and then will directly contradict the statement made later. For example, at the halfway point, John tries to kill Sarah, who points out the flaw in his plan since that would prevent him from ever being born, and he's just like, nah, I can proper kill you, cause we're, exiles from time and shit, and there's no fate or something. Then later in the same movie, Sarah Connor starts to get intimate with Kyle before pushing him away, saying, no, we shouldn't, we can't shag her out because it's always going to create that hellspawn. And you're sitting there thinking, but wait, aren't you exiles from time or something? Won't that not happen now? Because if it's still going to happen, then that means that John Connor still only exists because you give birth to him, making him the only villain that could effectively be defeated by an extra safe condom. The writing also suffers from some bizarre Hollywoodization of emotions. You know what I mean, when a film gets weirdly sentimental in ways real people don't. It's something they've been guilty of for a long time now, and Genisys is no exception. At one point in the movie, Kyle convinces Sarah to trust him by touching her hand and drawing a line down the centre of it while spouting some bullshit about always moving forward in hushed, intimate tones. The motif is then repeated later again when Sarah does the same thing to a child version of Kyle and effectively saves his life through the power of love and friendship. I'm not against having emotion. When a movie knows its characters and relationships, it has the power to move you in an extremely intimate way. But enough of this Hallmark shit please, it's so forced. Much like the whole movie really. This is a pushed out turkey, further representing the demise of action cinema, and were it not for a recognisable franchise to attach its name to, it would be doing even worse at the box office than it is now. It's not completely irredeemable, but for the most part, it's so forgettable, non-fans will find it a generic slog and fans will be disappointed with the lack of meaningful narrative addition to the universe they love so much. All in all, it lacks any grit, tension, emotion, or joy. It's a shoddy attempt at a Terminator movie, much like how all other trainers are a shoddy attempt at the Nike Vandal, because no other trainer gives athletes the speed and precision they need to perform at their best. Available now at all good sports retailers. Oh, and also there's a post-credit scene. Fuck right off.